Welcome to this video on the basics of masking. This video is going to cover the masking of this particular vehicle for primer surfacer, and then it will also follow through with the masking of this particular vehicle for top coats. Both of them are similar but use slightly different techniques. When masking for primer surfacer as seen here, our goal is to prevent the primer from traveling too far into any jams or areas where it may be unnecessary, while preventing creating any hard lines that could be challenging to remove later on in the sanding and prepping process. 1.5" tape is being used around the perimeter to back mask, and then paper or plastic will be applied over top of this and then trimmed out before the application of primer surfacer. The method that's used here is typically not used for top coats, as this can leave a bit of a hard edge, although this usually minimizes the hard edge that can be sanded with the surfacer. Once all the back masking has been completed, plastic sheeting can be applied over the vehicle. Roll out the plastic sheeting and then trim it to the correct length, and then open the plastic up. It can be helpful to have a partner to open the plastic, although this is certainly achievable with one person. The plastic's folded over itself several times, so grab towards the center and then pull outwards. Please note this video has been sped up. As the plastic goes over, pull it far out away from the vehicle, knowing that when the plastic comes down, it's going to stick to the tape that you've applied to the vehicle. Gently push the plastic down into place, and then once it's in place, you can start pushing the plastic into the tape, and then gently start trimming with the razor blade. As you're trimming, be very careful not to cut or damage the vehicle. Make sure that when you're done, you remove the box of sheeting from the paint booth or the spray area so we don't get it covered in overspray, which could contaminate the next job. When trimming the plastic or paper, make sure to use a relatively sharp razor blade, either a new one or one that's fairly new and still sharp. As you're trimming, trim against the tape itself, trying not to penetrate through the tape. Be especially sure not to cut or damage the vehicle. If it's easier and safer for you, you can cut from the bottom up. Some people will actually use an old style letter opener and use the letter opener to run around the perimeter to cut the plastic. That can work quite well and will not damage the vehicle. As you're working through and you've trimmed, you can go back and pull the plastic or paper away, making sure that as you pull, you remove any flaps or loose areas that could have occurred during the cutting process. And make sure you have your razor blade handy in case there's some parts of the plastic that still need to be trimmed. Once you've removed the plastic, you can discard the plastic from that area. Go back over any edges with 3/4 inch masking tape to make sure that you get those areas completely sealed. There may be some sections where the plastic and the back mask tape may be sufficient, but it may be much safer to go over some sections or all sections with some 3/4 inch tape and make sure to push it down securely. Once we've completed this, we have a nice sealed panel, and we've made sure that our masking is sufficient for the primer process as we see the completed primer here. A few other things to note is that we didn't mask very close to where we were priming. We made sure that we kept everything open to prevent any hard edges. Also, during the prepping process, the masking was reused to prevent any dust from entering the vehicle. When we move on to the top coats, we always want to start with the jams or any areas that we are going to be closing off first. And so in this case, we are dealing with this trunk opening. So 6" paper has been applied to both parts of the trunk jam. And then foam tape can be applied to create a soft edge. Or you can use a tool like this Easy Edger to fold a flap of tape over to create a soft edge. Alternatively, this can be done by hand by using your 2 fingers as a guide and folding the tape over itself. Some people will do this over their leg. I personally find that very challenging, although some people are very good at it. And as you pull your fingers back using a guide, you push about half or 1/3 of the tape over itself, creating this gentle flap, as we can see right here. And then when we tape that in the jam, that flap will create an area where the paint will get into, creating a very soft edge for the painting process. Once the jam is complete, we can start to close the particular opening. And as we close the opening, make sure the paper doesn't get pulled outwards in anywhere that it could get stuck and potentially stick to any of the painted surfaces afterwards. We've also made sure to start taping the back window and any other areas that could be affected by this particular trunk opening. The problem with masking a jam like this is improper preparation and masking can cause delamination, as we see here, where the clear coat's peeled off of this vehicle from its previous paint job. To prevent that type of issue, you can make sure that you properly mask and prep. And another issue that can happen is you can get a hard edge like this, where you can see some dry spray or a very sharp line. That's very noticeable after the paint job in the jam. So these are things that need to be avoided. And the best thing to do in many cases is to actually remove the doors, removable panels, and paint the whole part of the vehicle as the factory would have. You'll see on the rest of this job we did that. We removed the doors and we're painting the whole uniside of the car. This glass has a molding attached to it that cannot be removed. When dealing with this type of glass, you can use this trim tape or flip tape that has a hard plastic edge on the bottom and then an adhesive on the top with this backing. To use the tape, remove the backing and then insert the hard plastic edge between the trim and the body. What that does is creates a barrier between the two when you take that hard edge and then pull the tape away from the body and then tape the adhesive part down to the glass. This will prevent any bridging issues of the paint. As we do this, make sure that you pull these perforated sections off in an appropriate length. If you don't use this method, you may wind up with paint on the trim as we see here. Alternatively, you could also remove the glass for a high quality finish. When dealing with areas such as this, you can hard line with the tape. However, you should only do this if there's a natural breaking point. By hard lining it as seen here, you will wind up with a hard edge, which wasn't there from the factory. When pulling paper off of the masking machine, always start from the side with the tape and pull with one smooth swoop. Make sure when you have the paper in your hand, try not to let the tape touch the paper itself. Push the paper onto the vehicle wherever it is that you need it. In this case, there's been some back masking, so we can push the paper into the back masking. While masking this wheel well, I'm making sure not to induce any flaps or other areas that may be uneven. You want to try and keep your masking tight. When your masking is tight, it prevents any flaps, and those flaps can hold overspray dust that can come out onto your paint job later. They can hold dust, or they can move around, and if they're not taped down, they could fly back up onto the panel, touching your wet paint, which would ruin your paint job. As I go through here, I'm making sure to use a sharp razor blade again to gently trim out the masking paper and masking tape around the area. And then I will go back afterwards with some 3/4 inch tape as needed to tape back down any of these spots. I could use paper or plastic, and that's always a contentious issue is, should I use paper or plastic around the vehicle in these areas? And the choice is really up to you. Either method is acceptable. Just make sure that everything is tight, and that if you do use plastic, it is paintable. When we have holes such as these, we want to make sure that we put something in the holes to prevent overspray from getting into the vehicle, as well as preventing any dirt or debris from coming back out of these holes onto the paint job. Here I'm using foam tape. I'm just balling the foam tape up with the sticky side out and then pushing it into these holes and crevices. Having the sticky side out helps keep the tape into place. So I have used some paper on the car, but I'm also going to bag the car off with some treated plastic. So you'll notice that this plastic does say paint this side out or this side up on the outside, and that means that it is treated on one side. Never spray with the plastic upside down because the other side is not treated, and any of your paint or overspray could flake off and contaminate your paint job. So we can spray right up to the plastic. Some people will prefer to have a barrier of paper around the perimeter to prevent those flaking issues, or that may be necessary if you're using an uncoated plastic. In those cases, it's a good idea to have about 18 inches of paper around the perimeter of your paint area. Plastic could also have been used in the door jambs of this vehicle instead of the paper. However, we're trying to show some different methods and materials for this masking. Once the plastic has been set up over the vehicle, gently go around and trim the plastic. Again, making sure, as we did earlier, not to cut into the vehicle, into any of the trim, and cause any potential damage. Here we have used 18-inch paper at the front of this door to demonstrate how you would do 18-inch paper if you did trim it out that way. So you'd put your 18-inch paper around the vehicle, leave the one end loose, and then wrap the plastic underneath it and put the paper back over. And that would give you that 18-inch barrier, preventing any flaking of paint. And here we can see the finished masking along the bottom of the vehicle. As we finish up the masking, a really important thing to do is go back over the vehicle and check for any loose areas. Make sure that everything is pressed down. So what I like to do is go over every perimeter of the vehicle that we've masked and press down with my hands. And if I see something that looks like it could potentially leak, I'll apply more tape. Now you'll notice that on this vehicle, we've been using mostly 3/4 inch tape. The 1.5 inch has been reserved mostly for backmasking and specific areas where the 1.5 inch is necessary. The reason for that is that 1.5 inch tape is about twice the cost of the 3/4 inch tape and isn't always necessary. So it can keep the cost down for you, especially if you're worried about material supplies. Now, if you look in between the fender and the pillar, we have taken the paper, so the leftover paper, we've balled it up and rolled it inside there to prevent overspray, as well as dust from coming out. Going around the perimeter again, making sure everything's tight, especially around the interior. We don't want to get overspray on the interior of the vehicle because it's almost impossible to clean up, and you'd likely have to replace very expensive components inside. You'll notice that we did tape the hinges on this vehicle, and then we did create that hard line I talked about earlier underneath the quarter panel. I normally wouldn't recommend that. I'd normally recommend going to a break in the panel, and we'll show the end result once it's painted, and you'll see the result of having that hard line in there. So again, just going back, making sure to tape down everything, make sure it's tight, and then you should be sufficient for your top coating. And here's a preview of the finished painted product. Now, unmasking is also important. The best time to unmask is as soon as the vehicle is dried. So if you've painted the vehicle in a booth with baking capabilities, as soon as the vehicle's done its bake cycle and cooled down, it's a good idea to go and remove the masking. The masking will come off much easier at this point. Of course, I've sped this section up, but you can see that I'm gently going around the perimeter, removing the masking, and making sure that as I remove the masking, I'm trying to avoid having any of it touch the nice freshly painted surfaces, as this could potentially put a mark in that fresh clear coat. Go through the perimeter, and as I ball the masking material up, you'll see that I ball it or close it back into itself. I also try to remove all of the masking at this stage. I know it may be tempting just to remove a little bit of the masking enough to get the car out of the booth, but really it saves a lot of time and effort to remove all of the masking right now while it's fresh and warm. Otherwise, as it cools down, the masking tape will get a little bit hard and brittle and can splinter and dry up and be very hard to remove. Once the masking is removed, then we can throw the masking material out and admire our paint job. I did mention earlier the hard lining around the back edge, and now we can see there's a non-factory looking edge from that hard lining, which may not be acceptable. But in the door jamb where we did it correctly and removed the doors, we can see we have a nice, beautiful finish similar to what the factory did. Thank you.